They told me to ask my daughter for help. My own son had just closed an $8 million deal, and his wife told me to call the nurse's aide instead. That's the kind of sentence that lodges itself behind your ribs and doesn't move. I didn't say a word back to Diane that night. I was 63 years old, sitting in my recliner with my chest still aching from a test I hadn't gotten the results of yet. But before I tell you the rest of this, I need you to understand something. This isn't a story about money. It's a story about who still shows up when you've got nothing left to give them back. Let me back up first. I live in a small house on Cobbler's Ridge Road outside Asheville, North Carolina. Bought it the year my son was born, thinking it'd be the starter house before something bigger came along. Something bigger never came along. I've been meaning to replace the water heater for 2 years now, and every winter I tell myself this is the year. It was a Thursday night in early spring when the cardiologist's office called and left a message I made myself listen to twice. My wife Diane's phone rang not 30 seconds after I hung up mine. I watched her whole face light up like somebody had thrown a switch behind her eyes. "Grant, honey," she said, and her voice climbed 2 octaves. "Tell me everything." I sat my coffee cup down. "Grant's my son." "Is that Grant?" I asked. "Let me say hello." She didn't even turn around. She just walked toward the back porch like I was a draft she needed to shut out. I sat there and listened through the screen door to my wife of 34 years, congratulating our son like he'd cured something instead of closed a sale. I'm not saying that to be bitter. I'm saying it so you understand what an ordinary Thursday looked like in my house before everything changed. She came back in eventually, still smiling, and the smile dropped clean off her face the second she looked at me, like she'd taken off a mask at the door. "He closed the Pinnacle account," she said. "8 million. That's wonderful," I said, and I meant every word of it. Whatever had gone sideways between me and that boy over the years, I never once wished him anything but good. Diane didn't say anything else. She picked my pill organizer up off the counter, saw it was still full for Thursday, and set it back down without a word. Didn't ask why. Didn't ask about the chest pain I'd been calling indigestion for 3 weeks. Welcome to the channel, family. This is where we tell the stories that stick with you. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Now, here's the part where I'm supposed to make myself sound better than I was. I won't do that, because the truth matters more than my pride does at this point in my life. 12 years ago, I wasn't some fool who threw the family's savings away at a card table. I ran a small HVAC business, 3 trucks, 6 employees, built it from nothing starting at 26 years old. Then a supplier I'd trusted for a decade filed for bankruptcy, owing me $41,000 in unpaid equipment credits, and it dragged my whole operation down with it in under a year. Insurance didn't cover a dime of it. Banks pulled my line of credit inside of 60 days. My best 2 guys left for a competitor, and Diane never once asked if I was all right. She asked how I was going to fix it. That was 12 years ago. I've worked the parts counter at a supply warehouse off Tunnel Road ever since, 6 days most weeks, coming home smelling like machine oil and cardboard. Somewhere in the middle of all that, my son turned 22 and decided his whole young life had been ruined because his father couldn't help with a down payment on a condo. His college buddies were all splitting. He never forgave me for it. Not once, not even after I explained where every dollar had actually gone. In his mind, I'd failed, and he'd paid the price for it, and he needed somebody to blame. I was standing right there, so I got elected. My daughter's different. Paige is 28, works as a physical therapy assistant at a rehab clinic over in Hendersonville, about a 25-minute drive from us. She was 16 when the business went under, old enough to remember what we had, young enough that she watched me rebuild something out of the wreckage instead of just grieving what was gone. She showed up 2 nights after that phone call carrying a container of chicken and dumplings, my mother's recipe, heavy on the black pepper the way I like it. She didn't say one word about Grant's $8 million. She set the container down, kissed the top of my head, and said, "You're still holding your side like that, Dad." "It's nothing," I told her. "Uh-huh," she said. She never believed a word I told her when it came to my health, and she'd been right every single time before, so I stopped arguing. "Doctor," Alvarez wasn't smiling when she came back into that exam room with the folder in her hand. "Walter, I'm not going to dress this up for you," she said. "The blockage is significant. You're going to need a bypass, and I want it scheduled inside 2 weeks, not 2 months." There it is, I thought, the other shoe finally dropping. "Okay," I said, because what else is there to say? So we scheduled it. That's when a woman from financial services came in, apologetic, a woman named Patricia who looked like she hated her job in that particular moment. "My insurance had a coverage gap on this specific procedure at this specific facility," she explained. $4,100 due before they'd confirm the surgical slot. "I can set up a payment plan afterward," she said, "but the deposit has to be in before they'll book the operating room. You want to know something? I used to clear more than that some months back before the supplier went under. I sat in my truck in that parking lot, an 11 Ranger with 190,000 miles on it, and I ran the math 6 different ways. It came out the same every time. I didn't have it. My credit was still wrecked from the business collapse. Not one bank in Buncombe County would even take my call. $4,100, I thought. And I've got a son with $8 million sitting in an account somewhere. I told myself I wasn't going to call him. I held out for 2 days. Then I called anyway, because that's what a father does. You swallow every ounce of your pride and you dial the number and you hope to God there's still somebody in there worth hoping for. He picked up on the 5th ring, and I could hear it right away. Music, glasses clinking, somebody laughing too loud. "Dad, hey, can this wait? We're out celebrating the Pinnacle thing. Grant, I need to talk to you about something serious." "Yeah, all right, give me 1 second. Muffled sound, like he'd covered the phone. "Okay, go ahead." I told him everything. The blockage, the surgery, the gap in the coverage, the $4,100 I needed by Monday, or they wouldn't put me on the schedule. There was a pause. A long one. Long enough that for one foolish second I thought, maybe. His voice went flat when he came back. "I just spent 12 years watching this family scramble because of decisions you made," he said. "I finally got somewhere, Dad. You want me to pull money out of my accounts for this? Grant, this isn't about the business. This is my heart. You always find a way to make it about something," he said. "Ask the hospital about financing. That's what it's there for." Then quieter, meaner. "I've got partners looking at me now. I can't keep bailing out your mess every time something goes wrong in your life." The line went dead. My own son hung up on me while I sat in a hospital parking lot with a bad heart so he could get back to his champagne. I called Diane next and asked if she'd talk to him, maybe soften him up some. "Don't you dare guilt him over this," she snapped. "He worked hard to get away from everything you put this family through." "Paige has a job too, doesn't she? Ask her. She actually called our daughter Paula." After 28 years, my wife still couldn't get our own daughter's name right when she was too angry to think straight. I met Paige at a diner off Highway 25 2 days later, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who calls everybody baby. I hadn't planned on telling her a thing. I was going to eat my meatloaf and let her believe everything was fine. She knew before I opened my mouth. She always knew. "Dad," she set her fork down flat on the table. "What's going on? Tell me right now." So I told her. And I want you to understand. I was ashamed to be sitting across from my 28-year-old daughter, a woman who could barely cover her own rent most months, about to need money her own brother had refused without blinking. I hadn't even finished the sentence. Paige reached into her bag and set an envelope on the table, then turned her phone around so I could see the screen. A confirmation from a title loan company against her car. Approved. $1,800. "Dad, stop talking," she said, and her eyes were wet, but her voice never once wavered. "There's $2,300 cash in there too. I picked up a second job doing home health visits on weekends." "Paige," my throat closed right up. "You put your car up as collateral." "Cars can be replaced, Dad," she said, and she grabbed my hand hard, the way you grab hold of something you refuse to let go of. "You can't be. I've got a coworker who'll carpool me in for a while. It's fine." I sat in that booth and wept in front of a waitress named Donna and half the lunch crowd at a diner off Highway 25. My daughter, the one who didn't have $8 million, the one nobody ever bragged about on the phone, held my hand across a formica table and told me I was going to be all right. She's the only one who ever really saw me, I thought. I had no idea, sitting there, just how much that moment was about to matter later. A letter showed up at my daughter's rental house while I was still healing from surgery, and it turned out to be worth more than every dollar my son had ever refused me. I want you to sit with that a second, the way I did, because I sat with it for 4 days before I told a single soul. But let me take you back to the morning of the surgery first, because you need to understand what it cost to get to that letter. They wheeled me into pre-op at 6 in the morning on a Wednesday in early April, and the last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was Paige's face right up close to mine, her hand squeezing my fingers. "You're going to be fine, old man," she said. "I already told the nurses you're too stubborn to do anything else." 28 years old and steadier than I'd been in my whole life. Then the lights went out. I woke up 9 hours later with a tube down my throat and a weight sitting on my chest like somebody'd parked a car on it. Dr. Alvarez came by that evening, still in her scrubs. "Clean bypass, Walter," she said. "You did good." I didn't cry. I didn't have the strength to cry. I just lay there thinking about Paige's car, sitting behind a chain-link fence at some title loan office with a lien against it now. She bought me this, I thought. Not the hospital, not the insurance company. My daughter bought me this with an $1,800 loan against the only vehicle she owned. I'm going to make this right, I told myself. However long it takes. I spent the next 2 weeks recovering on Paige's pull-out couch, because my own house sat empty most days. Diane never texted once to ask how the surgery had gone, and I wasn't about to lay up alone, listening to nothing but my own breathing machine. Paige's rental was small, 2 bedrooms on the edge of Hendersonville, the kind of place where you hear the neighbor's dog through the wall every evening at 6. She'd taped her carpool schedule to the fridge with a magnet from her clinic, right next to a photo of the 2 of us from a county fair years back. I looked at that schedule every single morning. She's out there waiting on Denise's driveway at 6:15 every morning, I thought, because she put her car up as collateral for me, and Grant's driving a leased Audi to some steakhouse to celebrate a bonus he'll blow through inside a year. That thought sat heavier in my chest than the surgical scar ever did. She'd come home every afternoon, still in her scrub top, smelling like hand sanitizer and the clinic's break room coffee, check my incision, heat up something easy for us both, and sit with me watching whatever true crime show was airing that week. Not one time did she bring up the car. Not once did she ask when I'd pay her back. That's the difference, I thought one night, watching her doze off, sitting upright in a kitchen chair, still in her work clothes. Grant gives when there's something in it for him to be seen giving. Paige gives because it never even occurs to her not to. It's just love to her, plain as that. It was a Tuesday, 19 days after the surgery, when the mail carrier knocked instead of leaving it in the box. Paige was at the clinic. I answered the door in my robe, still moving slow, still tender across the chest. "Got 2 certified letters here. Need a signature," the carrier said. One from an outfit called Ridgeline Development Partners. One with a return address I knew instantly, because I'd been getting mail from them for 12 straight years. The North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Here we go, I thought. Another update. Another 6 months of nothing. See, I hadn't told you the rest of the backstory yet, and I should have. 14 years ago, before the supplier went bankrupt and dragged my HVAC business under, I'd bought 9 acres out past Fletcher, with an old cousin's inheritance money, land I planned to build a second shop location on someday. Then a fuel depot, 2 properties over, had a leak nobody caught for months, and it contaminated the groundwater clear across 3 parcels, mine included. My land got locked under a state remediation order before I ever poured a foundation. Couldn't sell it, couldn't build on it, couldn't do one single thing except keep paying the property taxes and watch that debt bleed into everything else I owned. That order was the final nail that took my business down. I'd never told Grant or Diane the full weight of what that land had cost me, because by the time it happened, neither one of them was asking anymore. They'd already decided I was the reason everything fell apart, so I stopped defending myself. Easier that way. I almost set that letter on the counter unopened and went back to the couch. Something made me sit down at Paige's kitchen table instead and tear it open right then. I read it twice, then a third time slower, because I didn't trust my own eyes. Remediation complete. Site released from state oversight effective March 30th. Complete. 12 years. 12 years of taxes on land I couldn't touch. 12 years of my credit sitting in the gutter. 12 years of my own wife looking at me like I was something tracked in on the bottom of a shoe. And there it was, in black and white. Clean. Released. Done. I set that letter down like it might go off if I moved too fast, then opened the second one. Ridgeline Development Partners. Turned out that while my land sat frozen under state order, a new hospital campus had broken ground less than a mile away, and my 9 acres of supposedly worthless swampland were suddenly sitting square in the path of everything that campus was about to bring with it. The letter was an offer. Real numbers behind it. $9,400,000. Cash. 45-day close. I read that figure maybe 15 times. I didn't whoop or holler or run around that little house. I sat very, very still. 9.4 million, I thought. And 3 weeks ago I was crying in a diner because I couldn't scrape together $4,100. I looked up and my eyes landed right on that carpool schedule taped to the fridge, Paige's handwriting in the corner. Denise, 6:15, don't be late again, lol. Because she'd rearranged her whole morning routine at 28 years old to save her father's life, and here I sat holding $9 million. I didn't call Diane. I didn't call Grant. Remember that, because it matters for everything that happens next. I never hid this money out of spite. I just couldn't find one single reason to run and tell the 2 people who'd already told me, plainly, in their own words, that my problems weren't theirs to carry. I picked up the phone and called somebody else. Ed Callahan, the voice on the other end, said. Ed had handled what little legal and financial business I had left standing after the collapse, mostly because I still paid him on time no matter how thin things got. Ed, I need you to look at some paperwork today if you're able. Something in my voice must have told him this wasn't a courtesy call. I told him all of it, the state release, the Ridgeline offer, the number, long pause on the line, long enough I thought it had dropped. 9.4 million, he finally said. Walter, that changes everything. I know it does, I told him, looking at that schedule on the fridge one more time. That's exactly why I need you to pull something else first, before we touch any of this. You remember a document Diane had drawn up about 6 years back? Ed went quiet. The asset separation agreement, he said. The one Grant pushed for. That's the one, I said. I remember it, Walter. Told Diane at the time, I didn't love the setup, but it was her right to protect herself given how thin our credit had gotten. You want me to pull the original? I want you to pull it and read me exactly what it says. Word for word, don't skip a line. Because if I remembered that document right, Diane hadn't just protected herself from my failures. She'd signed away every claim to whatever came out of that land, good or bad, forever. Ed called back 3 hours later, papers shuffling on his end. Walter, I'm going to read you the operative clause here. Diane Marsh hereby waives, releases, and forever relinquishes any present or future marital claim, interest, or right, legal or equitable, in the real property located in Henderson County described herein, including any proceeds, appreciation, or value realized therefrom, regardless of cause or circumstance. Regardless of cause, I repeated slowly. Ed, does that mean what I think it means? It means exactly what we drew up, Walter. 6 years ago she wanted the house and her retirement account fully shielded, so she partitioned the estate. Took the house as her separate property, and in exchange you took full, sole ownership of that contaminated land, debts and all. Notarized, binding, the day you both signed it. Whatever happens to that land now, good, bad, or a $9 million sale, she waived every legal claim to it in writing. Grant was the one who set that meeting up, wasn't he? I said. It wasn't a question, really. He was, Ed confirmed. Told his mother it was the smart move, that it'd protect her if the land ever got seized over your debts. I almost laughed, except none of it felt funny yet. Smart, all right, I said. Just not in the direction he was counting on. I sat there at Paige's kitchen table, with the afternoon light coming through those thin blinds. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt something in my chest that wasn't shame and wasn't grief. It was something closer to clarity. Ed, I want to move on the Ridgeline offer, I said. And I don't want one soul outside this phone call knowing until it's finished. Not Diane, not Grant. Especially not Diane and Grant. I looked at that carpool schedule one more time. Draw up whatever you need to draw up. I want the sale closed, and I want an irrevocable trust set up right alongside it, in Paige's name. Ed didn't say anything for a second. All of it, Walter? He finally asked. Every dollar after my debts are settled, I said. And my voice didn't shake, which surprised me more than anything else that day. She put her car up as collateral for me, Ed. She picked up a second job cleaning out bedpans on weekends so I could get on an operating table. She's been carpooling in before dawn for 3 weeks so I'd have somewhere to heal. I had to stop. My throat had gone tight. Meanwhile, my son told me to ask the hospital about financing, and my wife told me not to guilt him over it. So no, I'm not splitting this 3 ways to look even-handed. Fair already happened. It happened in a diner off Highway 25 3 weeks ago, and only one of my children walked through that door for it. I hear you, Walter, Ed said. I'll have paperwork ready inside the week. One more thing, Ed, I said. Don't put my name anywhere on the deed for the house I'm buying her either. The trust owns it outright. I don't want a single piece of this that anyone can ever pick apart later. Airtight, Ed said. I understand completely. I hung up and sat a long while in that quiet house, listening to the neighbor's dog bark twice and go silent, looking at that little schedule stuck to the fridge with a clinic magnet. They'll find out eventually, I thought. And when they do, they won't come here asking how my heart's healing. They'll come here asking about money. I wasn't wrong about that. But I want you to hold on to that thought, because it's exactly what happened, only not the way I expected, and not for the reason I expected either. See, I assumed Grant and Diane would show up once they'd heard about the land. They hadn't heard a word about the land yet when they showed up at Paige's door 11 days later. They came because Grant was drowning in a mess entirely of his own making, so badly that he was willing to walk right into the one place he'd sworn he'd never set foot in, his broke, embarrassing father's temporary bedroom on his sister's pull-out couch. He had no idea what was waiting on him there. Neither did Diane. I did. I'd had 11 days to get ready for it. If you've been with this channel a while, tell me in the comments, and hit that like button before you keep going, because this next part is the one you came here for. My son walked into my daughter's rental house ready to threaten me with lawyers and frozen accounts. He had no idea I was already holding a document that had frozen him out 5 years before he ever raised his voice about it. 11 days. That's how long I had between hanging up with Ed and hearing that first hard knock on Paige's door. 11 days to get my paperwork settled, sign what needed signing, and sit with a feeling I hadn't had in over a decade. Patience. It didn't hurt the way I expected it to. I want to tell you I spent those days plotting some grand speech. I didn't. Mostly, I healed. Walked a little farther down the block every morning. Sat on Paige's little back steps in the evening watching the sun drop behind the ridge, thinking about 9 acres of land that had finally, after 12 years, stopped punishing me. Then a Thursday evening came, and somebody pounded on that door hard enough to rattle the frame. Dad! Dad! I know you're in there. Open up. Grant's voice, loud, frayed in a way I'd never once heard from him. Not the smug, satisfied Grant from the steakhouse. Something else was underneath it now. Paige got to the door before I did, still in her scrub top, and pulled it open with a look I recognized. The same look she probably gave patients who tried to skip their exercises. You want to explain why you're beating on my door like this, she said. Grant pushed past her without answering. Diane, right behind him. My son, 32 years old, tie already loosened, sweat on his collar even though the evening had cooled off. My wife behind him, arms crossed, jaw set hard. Neither one looked at me and asked how my chest was healing. Not one word about the surgery. Dad, Grant's voice cracked slightly in the middle. We need to talk. Right now. There it is, I thought. Not how are you feeling. Not I'm sorry I hung up on you in that parking lot. Straight to business. Same as it ever was. Sit down, Grant, I said. You look about to have a cardiac event of your own. He didn't sit. He paced. I was going through the county property records today, he said, his voice shaking. Ridgeline Development just logged a closing on 9 acres out past Fletcher. Your name's on the old filing. 9.4 million. You sold it, didn't you? Diane's mouth actually fell open. 9 million, Walter. Is that true? So that's how they found it, I thought. Not from me. From a public filing. Almost funny, in a sick sort of way. It's true, I said, calm as I could manage. Closed 11 days ago. 11 days, Grant's voice climbed. You've had this for 11 days and didn't call me, your own son. I looked at him a long moment before I answered. Last time I called you, Grant, you were toasting champagne while I sat in a hospital parking lot trying to figure out how I was going to afford surgery. You told me it wasn't your problem. So no, I didn't feel obligated to call the second something good happened either. That should have softened him. It didn't. You hid this from us, he said, finger jabbing toward me like it might make the words truer. You knew the cleanup was wrapping up. You knew that land was about to be worth something. You let us think we were dealing with nothing while you sat on a fortune, just waiting to hand it to your favorite. Mom's still driving a car with 140,000 miles on it, Dad, while you had this the whole time. He actually believes that, I thought. Rewriting the entire story in real time and believing every word coming out of his own mouth. Grant, my voice came out quieter than his, which somehow made the room go quieter too. I didn't know that land was worth a dime until 19 days ago. Found out sitting right here on your sister's pull-out couch, recovering from a surgery she paid for. You want to talk about hiding things? I didn't hide a fortune from this family. I hid the fact that I was terrified for 12 straight years, because every time I tried to talk about it, your mother told me to fix the bill, and you told me I ruined your 20s. Diane stepped in then, chin lifted. Don't you dare stand there playing the victim, Walter. I stood by you through 30 years of your business falling apart around us. That money belongs to this family. You're being vindictive. You're being petty, Grant finished for her. You're being cheap, Dad, and it's disgusting. Cheap, I nearly laughed. A man who refused his own father $4,100 for heart surgery, calling his father cheap over 9 million. We're done asking, Grant said. And here's where his voice really shifted, dropped low, ugly, the voice of a man who thought he was already winning. Mom's filing for divorce Monday. Irreconcilable differences. Financial abandonment. My attorney's drafting a motion to freeze every account tied to that sale until a court sorts out an equitable split. You concealed marital assets, Dad. That's fraud, plain and simple. He slammed his palm flat on Paige's kitchen table, the same table where weeks earlier she'd slid an envelope of cash across without a second thought. You're going to be tied up in court so long you won't have a nickel left when we're finished. I looked at Grant a long moment, then at Diane. Then I stood up, slow, careful, still tender across the chest, and reached into my jacket pocket. You want to talk about lawyers, Grant, I said. Let's talk about lawyers. I pulled out 2 folded documents and slid the first across the table to Diane. You remember this? She looked down and I watched the color drain out of her face before she'd even finished the first line. 6 years ago, I said, you and Grant sat me down at our own kitchen table. You were scared the land debt might reach your accounts someday. Grant's idea, by the way, his smart idea. He told you it would protect your credit if the debt ever caught up with the property. I tapped the page. So you signed this. Had a lawyer draft an asset separation agreement. You kept the house and your retirement as your sole property. And you legally handed me full ownership of that contaminated land and every liability attached to it. Read it again, I told her, as gentle as I could manage, because there wasn't a shred of satisfaction in watching her hands start to shake. It doesn't say debt. It says regardless of cause. You didn't just protect yourself from my failure, Diane. You converted that land into my separate property under state law. You waived any future claim to its value, regardless of cause, just to keep your name clear of my debt. Your own attorney explained every line of it, and Grant signed as witness. Grant's face had gone pale too, but he wasn't finished yet. Never was. That doesn't matter, he snapped. I'll still take this to court. On what grounds, Grant? I slid the second document across to him. Take a look before you finish that sentence. He looked down. A bank statement. Paige's bank statement. $19, I said. That's what's sitting in your sister's account right now, Grant, because 3 weeks ago she put her only car up as collateral, and picked up a second job scrubbing bedpans on weekends so I could get on an operating table while you were ordering top-shelf bourbon to celebrate a commission. I let that hang in the room a moment. You want to talk about court, son? Go ahead. Bring every lawyer in Henderson County. But before you do, explain to a judge how you plan to claim a share of assets your own mother waived in writing 6 years ago on your own advice. Explain where you were the night your father needed $4,100 for heart surgery and where your sister was. Nobody said a word for a long moment. Just the hum of the window unit and the neighbor's dog barking once, somewhere down the block. I didn't hide this money from you, I said, and my voice finally came down soft, tired, done. I found out about the land's release sitting right here on this couch, 19 days after surgery. Took 45 days to close, and the trust was finalized last week. I didn't stay quiet to be cruel, Grant. I stayed quiet because I needed the time to make sure it went to the one person who actually earned it. But I want you both to hear this clearly. Even if I'd known months sooner, it wouldn't change one single thing sitting on this table right now. I looked at Diane first, then Grant. You two walked out on this family a long time ago. You just hadn't gotten around to signing the paperwork for it yet. The trust is already final, I said. Irrevocable. Every dollar goes to Paige. The very first thing Ed did was pay off that title loan and burn the lien to nothing. Then he cleared the balance on this rental, so she won't owe a dime through the end of her lease. I've funded a scholarship at her clinic for patients who can't afford their own physical therapy. There's a car waiting on her, safer than the one she put up as collateral, though she's going to fuss at me plenty about that. I folded my hands on the table. You're both free of my mess now. Isn't that what you always wanted? For 12 years I heard how I dragged this family down with my failures. Well, congratulations. The failure's over, and it turns out the two of you signed yourselves right out of whatever came after it. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my wife didn't have a single word left in her. Grant just stood there, jaw working, staring at that bank statement like it might rearrange itself into a different number if he looked hard enough. Get out of my daughter's house, I said. Quiet, final. They left in a silence I'd never once heard out of either of them. In 34 years of marriage and 32 years of raising that boy, no slammed door, no last word. Just two people walking out, realizing in real time that the very cleverness Grant had always been so proud of, the legal maneuver he'd talked his own mother into, was the exact thing that had locked them both out of a fortune they'd never see a dollar of. Paige stood in the kitchen doorway after they'd gone, arms wrapped around herself, watching me. "Dad," she said, barely a whisper. "You didn't have to give me all of it." "Yeah," I said. "I did. But I want you to know something else too," I told her, because I owed her the rest of it. I kept a little back for myself. Enough that I'll never again have to sit in a parking lot doing math that won't come out right, and enough that I'll never once be a weight on you either, not for as long as I live. You've done enough carrying for one family. Let me carry my own from here on out. I walked over and put my arm around her, careful of my ribs, and we stood there a minute in that little rental that wouldn't be hers much longer, not because she was losing it, but because she was finally getting more than she'd ever once asked anybody for. Cars can be replaced, she'd told me months before, sliding an envelope across a diner table. You can't. She'd been right about that. Turned out I couldn't be replaced either. Not to her. And in the end, that was worth more than any number Ridgeline Development ever put on a piece of paper. We stood there in the quiet, my daughter and me, finally steady, finally free. And somewhere across town, my son sat down that night to figure out how he was going to explain to his partners that an $8 million account wasn't nearly enough to save him now, and there wasn't a single soul left in his corner willing to bail him out. Funny how that works out. If this one got to you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I'll see you in the next one. Love doesn't announce itself with a phone call celebrating good news. It shows up quietly, in a carpool schedule taped to a fridge, in a car handed over without a second thought. The people who truly see us rarely need to be told what we're worth. So notice who shows up when you have nothing to offer back. That's not a small thing. That's everything. A small note for you. This story was written and imagined by AI purely for entertainment. though we hope its message about gratitude and love still found its way into your heart.